the session as I normally do to try to put the whole thing in context. So we're on chapter 8. It's called One Tough Cookie, and it starts off with John Bolton saying, quote, as somebody who has planned coup d'etats, not here, but, other places, it takes a lot of work, unquote. John Bolton said those words on CNN to Jake Tapper in July of 2022, nearly 3 years after his departure from the Trump White House. Tapper followed up with a request for details of the U.S. official's apparent criminal past. Bolton replied, well, I wrote about Venezuela in my memoir, and it turned out not to be successful. So this is John Bolton admitting on national television that he ran a coup against Venezuela. For Venezuelans, Bolton's confession underscored his already transparent role in directing the Washington failed coup in Caracas. Bolton acted as his most enthusiastic cheerleader inside of the White House. Days after the Trump administration's January 2019 recognition of Juan Guaido, Bolton appeared on Fox Business to articulate the stakes of Washington's new Venezuelan policy. Quote, it will make a difference to the U.S. economically. If we could have American oil companies invest and produce the oil capabilities of Venezuela, unquote. It was all about the oil. In just those few words, Bolton shattered the myth of Washington's preoccupation with Venezuela being the stronghold of cartels, drug trafficking, and everything else. It was all about the oil. According to Bolton, Trump was always skeptical about Juan Guaido's ability to get rid of Maduro, whom the U.S. president considered smart and tough. In his memoirs, Bolton disclosed that Trump instead expressed a desire to meet with Maduro directly and resolve our problems face-to-face unilaterally. He further revealed that the president did not even want to issue the initial White House statement in support of Juan Guaido under his own name, only caving after Vice President Pence held a phone conversation with the unknown Venezuelan politician on the eve of his fake swearing-in ceremony, not before. Bolton happened to be on hand for that discussion. He later recounted how after the call, I leaned over to Pence's desk to shake hands with him, saying this is a historic moment. So this was basically a Pence, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo staged coup. Trump was not in favor of any of it. And notice that John Bolton, who is the national security advisor for the Trump administration, wasn't in Trump's office when that phone call happened. He was in Vice President Mike Pence's office. John Bolton, Maduro would then go on to say, it all points to John Bolton, who has a criminal mentality, a murderer's mentality, according to Maduro. The Venezuelan president was referring to an assassination attempt that he had survived the previous year while USAID was funding Guaido's rise to power. On the evening of August 4th, 2018, Maduro was delivering an outdoor address to the ranks of Venezuelan's National Guard when a thunderous explosion erupted from the sky above him. Venezuela's president remained still, but was visibly alarmed as bodyguards unfurled protective shields around him. National Guard troops scattered in the streets as though they were being ambushed. As Maduro, his wife, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez and thousands of National Guard troops present managed to escape without injury, authorities traced the fireworks like combustion to a pair of bomb strapped, manually operated drones recovered from the scene, while Venezuelan's government promptly characterized the incident as a foreign directed assassination attempt on Maduro. Others, including Bolton, hastily dismissed it as a false flag operation. Quote, I can unequivocally say there is no U.S. involvement in any of this, Bolton said later on Fox News Sunday, within 24 hours of the attack. He said that it was a pretext set up by Maduro himself. Bolton's theory was discredited months later when a group of Venezuelan military defectors claimed responsibility for the botched assassination and provided CNN with cell phone video documenting their preparation for it. The organizers claimed that after establishing a base of operation on a Colombian farm, they purchased retail drones online and spent weeks practicing how to fly them before swooping down on their target. They ultimately failed to evade authorities in Caracas, who destroyed the drones midair after noticing they violated Venezuelans' airspace. What precisely inspired the would-be assassin's confession to the press is unknown. In their public account, however, the conspirators made certain to emphasize that authorities in Bogota and Washington were totally unaware of their plot, because of course they were. At the same time, they brazenly admitted to meeting with several U.S. officials on 3 different occasions in the aftermath of the attack. Once again, no reason for that was offered. Venezuelan's government, on the other hand, maintained that its own investigation into the assassination plot uncovered evidence that led it back to Washington. Maduro agreed to speak with the Gray Zone in August of 2019 during their second visit to Venezuela. Curious as to why the president wished to meet amid the mountainous area. He had a specific place that he wanted to meet them for the interview. After a 30-minute climb to the top of the area, it basically was up in the mountains. While they were waiting, they talked to several people that were patrolling the outpost, including one of the local leaders of their collectivo, which is kind of like that militia-styled group that I was telling you about, who spoke at length about General Smedley's butler's 1935 expose called The War is a Racket. They were very familiar with it. He informed us the president was visiting this place to address a graduation ceremony of firefighters in their national park service. Maduro would go on to explain that they fight fires with drones, which was a joke about the fact that he had been attacked by drones. Maduro would say that he believes in God. I believe that there was an event that day that God saved our lives. In Maduro's view, his assassination would have plunged Venezuela into an armed revolution. They planned it to perfection with so much evil to assassinate me, insisting the plot's Miami-based intellectual authors and financiers were part of a network. Maduro would go on to say that he couldn't accuse President Trump directly because he didn't think he was involved in it. He said, but I do have all the evidence to accuse John Bolton. He's a criminal and he failed. Bolton would later cite Max's interview, the guy at Gray Zone, in his memoir, The Room Where It Happened, recounting that his spirits were high upon learning of Maduro's accusation against him. So John Bolton was very proud of the fact that he was accused of trying to assassinate Maduro. Bolton built up his street creds as one of the most ruthless coup regime change artists. In April 2019, roughly 3 months following U.S. recognition of Juan Guaido, by then Trump had adopted the view that Guaido was a kid who nobody had ever heard of and recognized that Maduro still maintained complete control of Venezuela. Bolton, on the other hand, bolstered Guaido's um, estimate that 80% of Venezuelans, military, and 90% of the population supported Guaido and not Maduro. It was an assessment that even the opposition most loyal followers laughed at. On April 30th, Bolton would put his confidence to the test. By Bolton's own account, the date represented a turning point for which Guaido and his U.S. backers had long prepared. He recalled starting the day at 8:25 a.m. phone call with the Secretary of State and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo. As the U.S. officials debriefed, a contingent of Venezuelan opposition activists began shutting down sections of Caracas. Then, for the first time since joining the White House 1 year prior, Bolton made the decision to wake the president up to deliver important news of a military revolt in Caracas. Wow, was supposedly, according to Bolton, Trump's response. 20 minutes after Bolton and Pompeo's conversation, Guaido launched a Twitter live stream from his position in the middle of the highway, just outside of an airbase. The wannabe leader proceeded to call for a military uprising against Maduro, hawkishly waving his hands to emphasize an appeal for a rebellion. "We push forward. We are going to achieve freedom and democracy in Venezuela," he yelled. Sunlight had just begun. Even so, it was clear that only a handful of military personnel, fewer than a dozen, was beside Guaido. Though his statement failed to demonstrate a serious mutiny was underway, one of Guaido's accomplices was notable. Just over his left shoulder stood Leopoldo Lopez, the star of Venezuela's U.S.-backed opposition, who was widely believed to be pulling the strings of his shadow regime. As a key architect of the coup attempt underway, dubbed Operation Freedom, Lopez had successfully broken out of house arrest, where he was serving a 14-year sentence for his role in the deadly Guariba riots of 2014. As the drama in Caracas unfolded, nonchalant Venezuelan officials assured me that his attempted insurrection was doomed. By mid-afternoon, Reuters reported that an uneasy peace had returned to the streets, and there was no indication that the opposition planned to take over even a single military base. Lopez and his family had reportedly taken refuge in the Chilean diplomatic residence. They eventually settled in Spain's Caracas embassy, and Guaido was nowhere to be found. Multiple accounts, including Bolton's, later revealed that Venezuelan's defense minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, had duped Leopoldo, Guaido, and their U.S. handlers into following through with their scheme by providing them with passive support. Bolton remained convinced that Padrino Lopez was their man on the inside that was going to help them overthrow Maduro. Throughout the day, Guaido's miscarried mutiny, credulous corporate media correspondents repeatedly asserted that U.S. officials, to U.S. officials, that Venezuela's government would soon collapse any minute. Pompeo even told CNN that President Maduro was on the verge of fleeing Venezuela to take up residency in Cuba. He had an airplane on the tarmac, according to Pompeo. He was ready to leave that morning, as we understand it, and the Russians indicate he should stay. The U.S. Secretary of State insisted with complete certainty. Even as the hours passed away with no development, Bolton continued to publicly indulge his regime change fantasy. Quote, "Your time is up. This is your last chance," he tweeted. "Accept interim President Guaido's amnesty, protect the Constitution, and remove Maduro, and we will take off our sanctions. Stay with Maduro and go down with the ship." Another tweet that Bolton posted. Despite the evident failure, the U.S. media neglected to scrutinize Bolton or Pompeo's narrative of imminent triumph in Caracas. CNN's Jake Tapper, a noted neocon, spent his former days talking about Obama's failure to overthrow Syrian government was particularly hot for this scheme. Though he often sought viewers' attention to include media matters, with overblown anti-Trump tirades painting the president as a Russian puppet, Tapper was in complete lockstep with the Pompeo and Bolton narrative. For a broadcaster with a personality envious of drying paint, it seemed that trashing Trump while clamoring for endless regime change was the perfect formula for his success. Quote, "CNN live in Venezuela as Maduro government mows down citizens in the street," Tapper tweeted on the afternoon of April 30th, attaching a photo of Venezuelan soldiers firing their gun at a target beyond the camera's view. There was just one problem. The soldiers Tapper described as mowing down citizens was not the Maduro government. It was Guaido's staged scene, and Tapper later deleted the tweet. As Guaido floundered before the world, Washington's sole victory on April 30th was a theater of propaganda. Anya called someone that she knew that would be willing to interrupt the media's regime change racket. Having met Tucker Carlson during one of the most consequential diplomatic meetings of Trump's presidency, I was confident the Fox host would be ready to spill the beans. In the summer of 2018, she had traveled to Helsinki, Finland, to cover the summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, convened at the height of the Russiagate fiasco. At the time, she was working for Russian television RT. Though she had obtained official White House press credentials as a correspondent for RT America, the outlet at the center of Putin's alleged conspiracy to influence the U.S. population and interfere in the election, she was predictably alienated from the mainstream Beltway propaganda tools. While waiting to clear security for the presser in the hotel dining room, she listened as U.S. network personalities anguished over the idea of our president would even meet someone like Vladimir Putin. At one point, she overheard a reporter joke that Trump and Putin were having sex when they had their bilateral meeting, literally on TV. The White House press correspondent's view of the world was on full display when the joint Trump-Putin news conference finally began, and she had a front row seat. The presser consisted of opening statements from each leader and 4 questions, 2 from the U.S. side, AP and Reuters, and 2 from the Russian camp, presented by Interfax and RT International. Russian media were concerned with the material stakes of Washington-Moscow relations, with Interfax prompting Trump and Putin to discuss the future of Nord Stream 2. The pipeline, which was still under construction at the time, was an object of obsession for Washington because it allowed Berlin to source its energy from Russia rather than the US. RT International asked whether the two leaders had discussed the war in Syria. As Putin wrapped up his answer, a member of his entourage approached the podium with the infamous soccer ball. President Trump just mentioned that we had successfully concluded the World Football Cup, Putin said. Quote, speaking of football, actually, Mr. President, I will give this ball to you, and now the ball is in your court, unquote. A handful of Russian journalists applauded as Putin handed the ball to Trump, who proceeded to thank Putin and state that he would pass the gift along to his son, Barron, before tossing it over to Melania Trump, who was also seated in the front row. The friendly gesture brought an air of optimism in the room, and for a moment it seemed like a breakthrough. That hopeful spirit was squashed moments later when AP reporter Jonathan Lemire took to the floor to demand Trump address with high confidence claims by U.S. intelligence officials that Russia had interfered in the presidential election. Quote, just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did, unquote, said Lemire. Would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again? Lemire's grandstanding mimicked the act his colleagues from Reuters staged moments before, when he similarly pressed Trump to denounce Russia's government. Trump's refusal to accept their narrative of Russian interference in 2016's election outraged the Western media, which of course is why they did it. They used the Helsinki summit to further cast the US president as a Putin puppet. Rather than analyze the substance of Putin and Trump's statement, virtually all US and European coverage of the summit went down to Trump is Putin's puppet. Not to be outdone, CNN put an absurdly conspiratorial spin on the Russian president's attempt at football diplomacy, publishing a report that claimed Putin gave Trump a soccer ball that had a transmitter in it. The mainstream media's jungle of Cold War hostility was only interrupted by the presence of Tucker Carlson, who traveled to Helsinki to conduct an interview with President Trump. Having long abandoned the signature bow tie and conventional policy views that once defined his career, by the time of Helsinki's reunion, Tucker had emerged as a critic of Washington's foreign policy establishment along with the media. Tucker exhibited a willingness to consider arguments regardless of their assumed political silos, a fact that the author discovered when he hosted Max Blumenthal to offer a opposing critique of Russiagate in the months following Trump's election. While many of the media project strident public personas to shield their vanity and lack of real charm, the larger-than-life personality of Tucker displayed his genuine character. And though he could provide an endless stream of fascinating life stories about himself, he was just as inquisitive in person as he was on air. When Anya met Tucker in Finland, she found that despite our seemingly polarized political allegiance, we agreed on quite a lot. Unlike the jumped-up lapdogs overrunning Helsinki, Tucker was comfortable enough in his rank to view Washington's elite with scorn. Throughout Trump's presidency, Tucker solidified his place among the most influential media personalities in U.S. history with his primetime Fox program, Tucker Carlson Tonight, eventually earning the title of the most watched cable news show of all times. He set himself apart from other corporate news hosts, including those at Fox, as articulate, humorous, and a voice of the America First base. Each night, Tucker spoke for millions of Americans who were tired of the neoliberal policies such as NAFTA, deindustrialization, and the military's misadventures abroad. Personally burned by his own support for the Iraq War years prior, by 2019, Tucker had matured his foreign views. Quote, leaders on both sides of the aisle in Congress, in the media, and in our intelligence services, and in virtually every overfunded think tank in Washington have suddenly aligned tonight on a single point of agreement. America must go to war with Syria immediately, Tucker announced on air, hours after U.S. officials accused Syria's government of carrying out a chemical attack, which of course we know later on proved to be false. This ought to make you nervous. Universal bipartisan agreement on anything is usually the first sign of something deeply unwise is about to happen, if only because there's nobody left to ask skeptical questions. And we should be skeptical of this, Tucker told his audience, because it was shaping up to be propaganda to manipulate us, which is exactly what it was. While conducting routine examinations of pro-war disinformation, Tucker mercilessly grilled Washington's top policymakers before millions of people. To hear you say we need to knock off the Assad regime and things will be better in Syria, you sort of wonder like, well, maybe you should choose another profession, selling insurance, painting houses, something like that, he said to Max Boot, a fixture in Washington's neocon politics and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Is there no sanction for being as wrong as you've been? He asked Max Boot. Yet perhaps no figure attracted Tucker's ire more than Trump's officials who actively undermined the president's America First agenda. He held particular contempt for Bolton, who he called a bureaucratic tapeworm. Apropos so. Quote, try as you might, you can't expel him, Tucker said of Trump's national security advisor. He seems to live forever in the bowels of the federal agencies, periodically emerging to cause pain and suffering, just like a tapeworm. Tucker's attack on Bolton came days after Iran shot down a U.S. drone that had violated its airspace. In the aftermath of the Tehran response to Washington's drone, the New York Times revealed that Bolton and others in the White House had pressured Trump to bomb Iran. Belligerent advice the president rejected. While national security advisors were urging a military strike against Iran, Mr. Carlson, in recent days, had told Mr. Trump that responding to Tehran's provocations with force was crazy, the New York Times reported, crediting Tucker with personally preventing a war with Iran. Tucker's influence over Trump transcended their personal relationship. Without question, the most significant pair of eyeballs fixed on Tucker's show throughout the Trump years belonged to the president himself. As Washington's dime store foreign policy experts leapt to rally support for Guaido's coup, Anya reached out to Tucker with a request. As Guaido summoned military defectors to the Caracas streets, an invitation to Fox DC studios arrived in her mailbox. Tucker's broadcast on the night of April 30th was an anti-war rampage, perhaps unseen on cable news since 2003, when MSNBC host Phil Donahue, militant opposition to the Iraq invasion, made him a network highest rated host. It also led to his termination because you're not allowed to go against the war machine. Will the overthrow of Maduro make Venezuela a more stable and prosperous country? More to the point, would it be good for the United States? Tucker asked his viewers. He then mocked Republican Senator Rick Scott for demanding the deployment of U.S. troops to Venezuela during an interview with Fox earlier that day. Quote, before the bombers take off, let's just ask a few quick questions, starting with the most obvious. When was the last time we successfully meddled in the political life of another country? Has it ever worked? How are the democracies we set up in Iraq, Libya, and Syria and Afghanistan working tonight? How would Venezuela be different? Please explain it and take your time, unquote. As Anya walked through the Fox office into the green room, someone said hi. It was none other than Douglas McGregor, the retired U.S. Army colonel renowned for military commentary. He was resented in polite Washington society because he was straightforward. My friends among DC's marginalized circle of former military and intelligence officials with anti-interventionist views hope that McGregor could one day replace the Bolton figures on Trump's National Security Council. Unlike then, as Trump maintained captive to the neocon blob of Latin American expats, armed industry, funded think tanks, and the Pentagon Joint Chiefs, McGregor was relegated to a Fox studio. And it was there that the rock-ribbed Republican who had led U.S. tanks in Iraq during the first Gulf War riled against intervention in Venezuela. Quote, over time, our history in Latin America is a disaster. We will incur the hostility of the population. They'll want us ultimately to leave. And if Guaido is viewed as a puppet, he is going to have trouble lasting, unquote. Tucker made sure to feature one pro-Guaido voice on his show. It was none other than Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, a Cuban-American regime change lobbyist in Miami, who used his time on air to conjure a cast of foreign evildoers exploiting Venezuela as a base from which to threaten and even attack the U.S. homeland. It's a well-worn script that Cuban expat communities deploy ever since they failed at the Bay of Pigs. This is his quote. You have Hezbollah, you have Cuba, you have Iran, you have Russia, and you have China there. So imagine if this regime is now receiving a lot of international pressure, survives. Is it or is it not potentially a green light to open a door to Russia and Chinese for others to increase activity against our national interest right here in our hemisphere? Unquote. Tucker looked at him and said, yeah, no. I mean, it's kind of hard to see what you're talking about exactly, Tucker said. So they have a small number of Russian advisors there. I'm supposed to think that's a threat because why? No one really explains. Why should I not worry about the 8 million people leaving Venezuela? Tucker asked, referring to the 2018 Brookings report that estimated 8 million refugees fled Venezuela because there's no food. Isn't that a bigger travesty than a couple of Russian advisors? By then, Diaz-Balart had run out of talking points and presumably lost Tucker's audience of American First. Fumbling for a reply, he claimed the only way to prevent the flow of Venezuelan refugees to the U.S. border was to do what we can to make sure the regime is gone. Yeah, because war always decreases refugees, said no one ever. Tucker replied, or that the regime remains there, but there isn't a scene like this, pointing to the images of Guaido's botched revolt flashing on the screen. I mean, this is the kind of message from Syria. Tucker's carefully staged anti-interventionist theater capped by the performance of Colonel McGregor, who would go on to advise Trump's Afghan withdrawal that was sabotaged by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, suggested that support for Guaido was limited to Miami and Washington's permanent war lobby, and that the president and the supporters called the deep state. Trump himself must have known that a significant portion of his base, from immigration hardliners to isolationist folks, could not support the escalation of force against Venezuela that would destabilize yet another country. Anya planned to use her time on air to reinforce that message in a direct appeal to Trump. By the time I sat down, they were almost out of time. Tucker sought her opinion on the day's events. Here's what she said. The fake news media are lying about the situation in Venezuela. Let me put it for you this way. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had refused to admit defeat after losing to President Trump in 2016, banded together a group of 24 U.S. soldiers, and attempted to take over the White House by force. I don't think that she would be walking freely on the streets the way Juan Guaido is walking around Caracas, because that's literally what he did. Anya then addressed reports of the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, noting that the media never acknowledged the role of the U.S. sanctions played in fomenting it. To illustrate the point, she cited a report from the Center of Economic and Policy Research think tank published a few days earlier, which found that U.S. sanctions contributed to thousands of excess deaths in Venezuela between 2017 and 18 alone. President Trump, if he truly cared about the Venezuelan people and the American people for that matter, he would end this disastrous policy. He would end the sanctions and he would look into John Bolton's eyes, into Elliott Abrams' eyes, and Mike Pompeo's eyes and say, "You are fired. You are leading me down a disastrous path, another war for oil." Tucker laughed out loud and said, "Man, you're passionate." He was right. For Anya, it was speaking out against war on Venezuela and in defense of the people that she had met. Tucker then goes on to say, "I'm not sure I agree with everything you said, but I'm glad that you could say it here. You were just there, and I don't think that you would be allowed to say that on any other show." Anya agreed with Tucker's assessment before making her last comment. President Trump promised to drain the swamp, and he flooded his national security team with the exact same swamp. Tucker then says, "Well, I agree with that, actually." With that, Tucker handed the show off to Sean Hannity, who at the time was still wearing his CIA and FBI label pins. Hannity struggled to hold back his contempt and surprise as he labored through a few seconds of banter with Tucker. By the next morning, our interview had been translated into Spanish and gone viral in Latin America, especially Venezuela, which broadcast the exchange on state television. Days later, Tucker informed me that our interview not only garnered top ratings, but had caught the attention of President Trump himself. According to Tucker, the president phoned him shortly after the events of April 30th and thanked him. Trump complained that if he actually listened to Bolton's advice, he would have already started World War III, IV, and V, explaining that he merely kept the hawk on his shoulder to send a message to world leaders that all options were on the table. Indeed, Trump banished Bolton as his big stick in international negotiations, fashioning the neocon as a prop in his art of the deal diplomacy. In reality, however, Bolton outmaneuvered the president, exploiting the swamp's connections and control over the flow of information in the White House to sabotage nearly everything that Trump tried to do. In his memoirs, Bolton boasted of undermining Trump's push to draw down the U.S. military occupation in Syria, as well as the president's attempt at détente with Russia and North Korea. Bolton paid particular attention to the Helsinki summit, even confessing his hope that Trump would be irritated enough by Putin's delayed arrival that he would be tougher on the Russian counterpart, while exalting the U.S. media's belligerent conduct at the leader's press conference. He also described instructing Trump to reject further bilateral arms reduction agreements with Russia, along with his view that the U.S. could withdraw from the Cold War era INF treaty. Trump heeded that advice and announced the U.S. withdrawal of the INF treaty in February 2019. While Bolton's treacherous behavior eventually led to his dismissal, it won him a veneer of respectability within the imperial cesspool of the elite in Washington, and a hero status among the liberal anti-Trump resistance. embodied by the likes of Jake Tapper. Without this rebrand, the crux of Bolton's legacy would have instead been his promotion of the catastrophic Iraq War. Though Trump did not fire Bolton until September, the president's frustration with his national security advisor reached a breaking point following the events of April 30th, 2019, echoing Tucker's account of Trump's reaction to the Venezuela article. The Washington Post cited senior administrative officials who claimed the president felt misled by Bolton and other advisors and that he was believed to have underestimated Maduro. The president's dissatisfaction crystallized around National Security Advisor John Bolton, and what Trump had said is an interventionist stance at odds with his view of foreign affairs. So, Bolton's coup policy had not only flopped, but boomeranged. It became clear that Venezuela's military leadership had rejected his call for a mutiny. A photograph of Guaido standing in the middle of an empty highway with a stunned expression on his face and cell phone expressed the picture of what was going on in Venezuela better than anything else. Though who exactly was on the other line was unknown, many social media joked that Pompeo and Bolton were most likely scolding him for embarrassing them so badly. Designed to convince Trump of Guaido's strength, the botched revolt instead left the novice politician looking bug-eyed, unwanted, and alone. In the days following April 30th, administrative officials informed the media that Trump began referring to Maduro as a tough cookie in conversations around the White House. Meanwhile, Bolton said the president had taken to describing Guaido as the Beto O'Rourke of Venezuela. Probably not a better, more apropos description of him either. That's hilarious, and it sounds just like Trump. Poor Bridget keeps getting kicked out. So that's the end of that chapter, and I don't think we have time to go into the next one, but I will tell you this is the one that we're really going to want to spend a little bit of time on. So I'll wait until tomorrow, because this is the one that connects the oil companies, and we will be naming them, to the Venezuela coup. And that's what we're known for. So I'm here for it. So we're going to wait so that we can do that all in one show and not have to try to piece it together. Because, of course, USAID/CIA makes a prominent presence in that group as well. Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone here on X and on Rumble for joining us. I'm listening to this as we're going along, and Bolton's name, this is all about Bolton. Every bit of it, this chapter. There's no doubt about that. And Tucker Carlson and his objections with Fox News. But I just asked a question. Brock, a simple question. I posted it in the pill. Said, did Bolton undermine President Trump? And God, the information he came out with. It just blows my mind. It wasn't just Ukraine. We're talking about China. We're talking about the Ukraine. We're talking about
Venezuela.
North Korea and Iran policies,
yes.
Afghanistan, you name it. That man did all kinds of damage. Thank you, Colonel.
So you know why they had to get General Flynn out of there, right?
Oh, exactly. Because he knew exactly what was going on and where the bodies are buried.
Yes. And none of the shenanigans that Bolton tried would have flown with General Flynn. Bridget, go ahead.
And John Bolton also published classified information in his book.
Yes.
And just to put that in perspective for everyone, that is a fact. It just shows you how, I mean, you couldn't have gotten a slimier slime ball in there, period, you know?
And if what I think is true, by putting him in there and mapping out his network, there's actually, obviously, from behind the scenes, you see that President Trump had the wherewithal to know what was going on. So, why exactly was he there? Like he said, a hawk on his shoulder to use in the art of the deal, but also putting him there and his nefarious interference, as SR 71 just pointed out, he had to be calling people all the time. He had to be networking behind the scenes. And I can guarantee you that all of that was tracked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now they're getting hung with their own rope. I mean, it really is the expression, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't have done a better illustration with his first term as president.
Yeah. In many cases, that is absolutely true. Yeah. I just found it fascinating that the national security advisor, in a phone call between the vice president and the president, isn't sitting in the president's office where he should have been. He was sitting in the vice president's office where he shouldn't have been. Because obviously, Mike Pence was, and you look at Mike Pence's staff and all of the nefarious connections. I know there's people out there that thinks he's a White House, but I've not seen any evidence of that. So I'm just going on what I'm seeing.
And he has a very checkered past, from what I understand as well.
Yeah, a lot of that's kind of hyped up. I don't know what is true and what isn't true. But it's a perfect cover to hide behind. You know, I'm the staunch Christian, everything's hunky dory about my entire life. And based on the unraveling of so many of these religious fronts during our expose into Operation Gladio, it really does lift an eyebrow when people cloak themselves in their Christianity. It's one thing to be a Christian and to advocate for Christianity, but I'm sure you guys have met people that they take it way beyond that and they use it as a cudgel to beat other people up with. Those are the people that really need to be watched because there's something nefarious going on. That's not the way things operate. But I find people that cloak themselves in it to be more disingenuous than those of us who live our lives. And you guys have heard me say, I believe everything the last 3 years relating to this mission was divinely inspired just because of the quote unquote coincidences of how it overlapped my entire life. So there was nothing left for random association. But that's not the same thing as every single piece of this being wrapped up that way. There's just something nefarious about people that do that, in my opinion.
Do you know it says you will know them by their fruits?
Yeah.
And again, like you say, his actions do not demonstrate that. And that's what the ultimate test is, and that's what the Bible says we're supposed to do. Use discernment and know them by their fruit.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's trials in everybody's life for you to be tested for higher responsibilities, I believe. And I also believe I had someone explain this to me, which was an interesting way because I'm a very visual person, that our road to heaven is literally like a stairwell. And there are lessons to be learned along the way. And until you learn the lesson, if you're on step 3, whatever the lesson is that you're supposed to be learning at step 3, until you learn it, you're going to stay at step 3. And once you learn it, whatever the challenges are that's handed to you at step 3, until you properly respond to those challenges in the way in which God wants you to learn a lesson, you don't get to go to step 4. And when you're at step 4, there's going to be challenges for you. And I'm not talking about like physical and that type of challenges, just things that you're supposed to learn. And when you've mastered those, you go to step 5. And I I visualize that as some of us will stay at 4 forever, and that doesn't mean you're not going to go to heaven. It just means you're not going to be used in a future battle that you need to have learned that lesson because you didn't master that lesson. And I think that's kind of analogous to our journey throughout life. Some of us get stuck at a step and you're going to stay there forever, whether it's, financial responsibility or whatever. If you keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again, you cannot be used in a future battle. If you require that lesson and you never learn that lesson. Again, it doesn't mean you're not going to heaven. It just means that you're not going to be at the next level of engagement in this fight. And I pondered that again. This was told to me like 25 years ago. And it was a concept that I thought was so weird when it was first said to me. I'm like, what the hell? And then, of course, the song Stairway to Heaven. And I'm not kidding. One day that I was listening to that song and I'm like, huh, I wonder if that actually is true. And I found it in my own personal life that the more you listen instead of talking all the time, the wiser you um, get because you use that time to absorb the lessons that you're supposed to be and learn from the experiences that you are being given in your life. And it prepares you miraculously for the next battle. And that's kind of what I view all of this is. I didn't realize that I was on a ladder throughout my career to be where I am today. And I may only be on step 5, but that's exactly where I'm supposed to be on this journey, having learned the lessons to be able to tackle this challenge for wherever it leads us. Ron, go ahead.
You're kind of onto something there, Colonel, and I want to extrapolate upon that. Number one, as Christians, we are supposed to live Christ-like and be examples for people to follow. We are not supposed to push Christianity on everybody. We are supposed to be the examples for people that want to follow in our footsteps. And in my humble opinion, Christians are their own worst enemies because too often what they do is they try to tell everybody else how to live their lives while they are living in absolute sin and hypocrisy. And they are the ones that are creating the animosity. It's very, very similar. I use that very similar to an analogy to the Coup operation, where you've got, the Coup operation was designed to get people to think critically, but you had people out there who were telling people what the Coup was saying, and then you had followers who were they weren't reading the drops themselves, and they were going out and they were spreading all these things and saying, oh, well, Q said this and Q said that. Meanwhile, what they're doing is they're giving Q a bad name, just like Christians give God a bad name. And, what we're supposed to be doing is doing the things that we do the best that we can to honor God. And when we do that, then we will draw people to want to be like us. So, and I think that, the things that you're doing, the fact that you don't necessarily bring religion and Christianity into this. To me, and you do what you do with honor and integrity and very Christian-like. Even though you don't profess Christianity, you do it in such a way that you inspire people to want to be like you, and that is what Christians are supposed to be. And everything I don't know, when I drive by and I see choose God or go to hell, that's like, oh my God, just stuff like that. It just drives me absolutely crazy. So anyway, I just wanted to just chime in on that. I think that what you're doing is right, and you're onto something there.
Thank you. Obviously, I have my own fault, my potty mouth being one of them. But it is who I am. I don't make excuses for that. I do try to be better. Sometimes it doesn't work all the time because I'm not perfect. And also, to Ron's point, the hardest conversations that I always had with my dad about religion, we did not grow up in a Christian home. The only time, to my knowledge, my dad ever saw the inside of a church was at a wedding, literally, and I'm not kidding. Same thing with my mom. I started going into church with my neighbor, and through that process, found God. And late in life, I would have conversations about Jesus, the life, and some of the lessons, especially during the time that I was going to Indiana University when I was actually reading the Bible, because I just found lots of it completely fascinating. And my dad was my best friend. And so I would share different things with him. My dad's big comeback every single time that we was talking about religion is the fact that what Ron just pointed out, the hypocrisy. All of these large church preachers were all living a lie. And they would be caught in adultery. They would be caught, committing crime, stealing money from the church, whatever. That is a crutch that people use against Christianity. And we know that as false prophets and blah, blah, blah. And they talk about that in the Bible, about there will be people in those roles, and their whole purpose is by Satan to ensure that people have a reason not to be Christians. And that was kind of always my response to my dad. Yeah, there's false prophets out there, just like in his big complaint about politicians. That's the same thing that politicians do, Dad. They lie to you. That's what these people are doing. They just happen to be lying about their persona, but that's what politicians do. They're really no different than that. And so I think that's part of this whole thing when you wear that on your sleeve and you use it as a reason of, denouncing other people. Well, you're not going to go to heaven. Well, that's not your decision. That's God's decision, and you don't get to make it. Why are you? Go ahead.
Hi. Unfortunately, I've only been able to, the last couple times, slip in the last couple of minutes of everything, and I go back and I listen to it. So I just want to give you and Bridget heartfelt thank you, and for what you guys have been doing and the amount of effort that you put in. I really kind of always want to say that every time I can. And you are absolutely both a beacon of light to everybody else. And I absolutely appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
I love you guys.
Thank you. And I appreciate the fact that you do that, because oftentimes being where we're sitting, we don't get a lot of great feedback. Not that we get a lot of bad feedback. I'm not saying that, but the lack of feedback is I just take it, especially as long as people are joining our effort, as kind of a given. But it is always nice to have someone come up and say that. So thank you for doing that. Ron, go ahead.
I want to agree with that. It's the things that we do, it is such a thankless job. The hours of book reading and research and all the writing and all the stuff that we do. And then when we come out, I mean, the things that you and I and Bridget and SR and, the things that we talk about here, this is just like you're getting like, 20, you get a couple of minutes of the things that we have literally spent. I mean, I spent 20 years studying this stuff. So, when I have on my channel and I do stuff and people say thank you, it really does put wind in your sails, because it makes you feel like everything that you're doing is it's worth it. Because even if it's just, it's kind of like the teachers, when the teacher says, well, you know what, if I just reach one kid, it's worth it.
Right.
And, I'm not going to put words into Colonel's mouth, but I feel that way when I'm doing stuff on my channel. If I just reach one person,
Yep.
It's like, you know what, it's worth it.
So I don't know, Bridget, have I talked about the comment, because my days are running together. Have I talked about when I was at the Great American Restoration Tour and the people were asking me about reading while the panels were going on?
You briefly went over some of Garth, but not very much. And I don't believe you went over that.
So I'm currently reading a book that's like 1,000 pages long. I mean, it's a humongous book, and it's about a subject, weirdly enough, that I have not run across yet. I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but because I do have a couple of things I want to check out. I know it, in fact, happened, but again. So anyway, I'm reading this really thick book, and the lady sitting next to me throughout the conference during one of the first day's breaks looks over at me and she goes, because of course I'm listening to the panels because they were telling jokes and stuff like that, and I'm laughing and I'm kind of muttering comments to my husband sitting next to me, so it's obvious I'm paying attention while at the same time I'm reading. And she leans over and says something to me during break, and she's like, I have no idea how you're reading and listening at the same time. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, this is one of 120 books that I've read on the same topic. So at this point, I'm able to read, because most of the stuff is a repeat from, 10 different books all crammed into this book. There are a few new names, which is the part that I'm checking out. But I said, you can kind of just go down through. My initial read of a book is going and looking for new names. Not that I'm not reading the book, I am, but, and I'm not a speed reader, but there are certain things that are so familiar to me now with drug trafficking and weapons trafficking that I've already read about a particular instance. It's just being put in a different context in this particular book. And I was telling her that, and I said, and besides that, I'm a mom. I'm an avid reader. I have been my whole life. So I could read a book while I was helping my kids with homework. It's just something that over the course of time, you just learn how to do. But anyway, I thought it was funny. And at least 5 or 6 different people came up to me and said the same thing. I have no idea how you're doing that. But I don't go anywhere without my book, because you never know. Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, you did run off without the Venezuela book.
I did, but I had my big thick book. I had the other book I was reading.
It's funny because you never, yeah, you're right. You never forget. You always have your books handy.
And I usually, just in case I finish, I'll usually have 1 or 2 books with me in addition to the book that we're doing when I travel. It was literally the first time that I didn't bring the book that I needed that we were in the middle of on a trip. And we've been doing this for 3 years. And luckily, it wasn't one of my extended journeys. It was just an up and back, so we were able to recover. But yeah, I felt like a total idiot when I unpacked my suitcase and I'm like, where's my stinking book? I had the other 2.
Yeah. You never do.
Never.
Ever. and it was just funny.
It's that damn flying that did.
You're human. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it was that damn flying that did it to me.
Oh yeah.
Colonel, speaking of books, I don't know if you know this, but I just wrote a book, and I want to send you one. So I need to know where I need an address to send you a copy, a signed copy of my book.
Sure. What's the name of your book? Tell everybody.
It's called "The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible." It's actually a quote from C.S. Lewis. It's a deep dive on Matthew 24:34, and the first two chapters are really all about how going back into the 19th century and early 20th century, how Christianity was corrupted by multiple forces to get to where we are today. And then I go into I go into a lot of stuff. I don't want to give it away, but it's called "The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible," and obviously that's a title to try to get people to to be like curious about it.
Yeah.
But I didn't say those words. That's if anybody knows who C.S. Lewis is, he's one of the greatest Christian apologists ever, and he uttered those words about Matthew 24:34. So
cool.
But in any event, I want to send you a copy.
Sure.
Of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, guys. We'll take care, and I will see you tomorrow. Tonight at 9:30, we are going to have a very explosive show on Apple Warriors show, and it's one of my favorite ones that I think I've ever done with him. I wish we could have done it together. I think it would have been much better if we had done it together, but he stood me up, so y'all can give him shit in the comments tonight. But it's going to knock your socks off, and it's about our National Guard and some very nefarious things. So you don't want to miss it. All right. I'm going to go have dinner with the Kate brothers and my sisters. So you guys take care, and I will see you tonight at 9:30. Otherwise, and tomorrow, War Hamster had a last minute preemption, so we will not be doing the noon show tomorrow. And whenever he's feeling better, we'll reschedule that. If it's not going to be the following Thursday, of course, I'll get that information out to you as soon as we have it. So thanks again, everyone. See you tonight at 9:30 and tomorrow at 4. Take care. Take care. Oh, goodness. It's not going to let me close it.